Have you ever been tempted to turn your hobby into a job? If you're a keen knitter or crocheter or sewer and you've been tempted to turn that into a job, or somebody has said to you, oh, you should sell that, or you think, I make so many things, I can't keep all these things. Maybe I could sell a few to make some extra money. Maybe I could write some patterns, or a local yarn shop may have asked you to teach some classes. There are a lot of opportunities to turn your hobby into a job, and it can be very tempting to do it, but is it always a good idea? Will it mean that you will lose the love for your hobby very, very quickly, and it will no longer be a hobby? And or you still enjoy doing it, and you can turn it into a successful full-time job? These are the things I'm going to chat about in today's video, so I hope you enjoy it. If you're new here, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns, I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website, YarnAddict.co.uk. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Obviously, I have turned my hobby into a job, and for me, it's been reasonably successful. But I started doing this because I wasn't working due to health issues. My kids were primary school. I hadn't been working for a number of years due to health reasons, chronic pain, and I was getting really bored, and that's how I got back into knitting, because I was just bored being home all day with not a lot to do. I couldn't do housework all day because I was in too much pain. I couldn't volunteer at school a lot because I was in too much pain. I couldn't be out seeing friends all the time because I was in too much pain, and a lot of my friends were working anyway, so I got back into knitting. And then, because money was tight because I wasn't earning anything, I look for ways that I could sell a little bit of what I knitted in order to make some money to buy more yarn, basically, or just buy little extra things. So that's how I got into doing this as a job. I'm not going to talk about this in detail because I've got another video on it, which I'll link at the end. But I just want to give a brief sort of overview for those who haven't heard this story before or who are new here. So I made a bunch of like fake fur fluffy scarves. They were very popular at the time. We're talking early noughties. Yes, early noughties, I think it was. Maybe mid noughties. And I made all these like fake fur type scarves because they're very popular, and I worked out a pattern. I could make one out of one ball of scarf and really thick needles, probably like 8mm needles, but I can't remember. And a few people said they liked them, so I made some to give away as gifts. Then one of my neighbours asked if she could buy some off me to give away as Christmas presents. And then I thought, well, maybe other people would like to buy them. So I sold some at local craft fairs, and I sold, one winter I sold loads on eBay. And because they just used one ball of really cheap yarn, I could sell them quite cheaply and still get enough money to cover my costs, plus a little bit extra. And then I got bored with that, so I started branching out into other things. I was trying to do some local craft fairs, but the craft fairs I was doing were they weren't craft fairs where people were paying a lot of money for stuff, and I wasn't really covering my expenses, or barely covering my expenses. I very quickly realized that that wasn't going to work. So then I was encouraged to try writing my patterns, and things kind of snowballed from there. This was before Ravelry, so finding a place to sell your patterns online was a bit more challenging. I think Etsy was around. Yes, Etsy must have been around, because I think that was the first place I sold my patterns online. And but they didn't do automatic PDF downloads, so I had to email out any PDF patterns manually. I also was asked by a local yarn shop owner, or a woman who started a yarn shop like an hour's drive away from me, which I class as local. She asked me if I could teach some workshops for her, and which I did, and then that gradually snowballed, and then I contacted a magazine through, I think they kind of had an online magazine first, and I submitted something for them. The editor was going to start a print magazine, so she commissioned me to design something for that. And then I met another local designer who was designing for some of the other British knitting magazines at the time. So she put me in touch with some of the editors that she worked with, and I submitted stuff to them. And then this snowballed from there, and I got in contact with some American magazines, and I did some designs for Vogue Knitting and some of the other magazines and books published by the publisher of Vogue Knitting. Like I designed for, I think I did one thing for a Neuro magazine. The Malabriga magazine or book, I think. A few other American yarn companies. I can't remember which ones they were. I also met Debbie Bliss, who had at the time had her own yarn company, and she had a magazine that was published by the same publishers that published Vogue Knitting. So it was, even though it was sold here as well, and although she's British, it was very much an American magazine. Anyway, I met Debbie at this local yarn shop where I was teaching, and she asked me if I could design a shawl for her magazine, and then after that she commissioned me to do some other things. And so I did that, and basically any opportunities that came my way, I said yes to. For a long time, for several years, every time I was asked to do something, teach at an event, design something for a yarn company, for a magazine, for a book, contribute to a book, whatever it was, I was like, yes, I will do it. Eventually I had to start saying no to occasional things because it was just too much. But to start with, I was very much like, say yes, and then things just gradually build from there. So that's my story very briefly. And as my kids got older, it got easier to fit it in around them and around my health problems. And my chronic pain has been better since my kids have left home and been independent. Not having that responsibility every day has made my pain a lot less. So it's easier to manage doing all these things now than it was. And it is a full-time job for me, but I don't really work full-time hours unless you count the amount of knitting time I do. I don't count my knitting time into my work hours because knitting is so slow. I don't count it into my work hours, which I probably should do, but it's a very slow thing to do. So I don't count my knitting into my work hours. Sometimes if I have deadlines, I will do, but I think of my work day as the hours I spend up here on the computer doing stuff, writing patterns, recording and editing YouTube videos, doing social media, answering emails, admin for my online shop, all that kind of admin jobs, all that kind of stuff. I count, and the amount of time I spend preparing and teaching workshops. I count kind of that as my work time, and then the rest of the day I knit. I probably should count the knitting as my work time, but it would mean that I would work ridiculous hours. But the time spent actually working at my desk is definitely part-time hours because of the chronic pain I have. But I did not have a very good job before I gave up work. I was working as in admin for a local authority. It was a very low paid job, so it wasn't like I gave up some great career. I think if you have a very good job that you are giving up in order to do something crafty as a full-time job, and you need to replace a full-time professional salary, lots of people have done it, but it's definitely more challenging. And when you hear, especially knitting designers talk, you realize a lot of them actually have chronic health conditions. That means they can't do a normal job. Like I would struggle now to do a normal everyday job, even a part-time job like I used to do, like a part-time office job. I would struggle because I can work for an hour at my desk and then go and take a break and sit in a comfy chair, or if I'm in a lot of pain, lie down on the floor and stretch my back and neck out. If I've been teaching or traveling to teach, especially, or been to a show for a couple of days, I can take a few days off and do a lot less. And I couldn't do that if I worked in an office. I couldn't say if I worked in my old job, office job, I couldn't do an hour at my desk and they say, so I need to go and sit down in a comfy chair now for half an hour and knit and relax. I couldn't do that. So I don't think I could do my old job now. But so there are a lot of designers and knitting teachers who do this job because they can fit it around their health issues and their disabilities. And I think that is important to remember. There are also people who had professional, well-paying jobs before this and have turned their career into professional, well-paying jobs. So it is possible, but it is challenging. And I would say it is probably more challenging now than when I started out because it is very crowded now. So let's look at why somebody might want to turn their hobby into a job. Well, your friends will quite often say to you, if you knit or crochet or make anything, they'll probably say, oh, you should try selling that. They probably think, unless they do the same hobby as you, they probably think it's something that takes, knitting a sweater a few hours, maybe a few days, maybe a week. It probably would take a week if you did it as a full-time job. And they may not realize how much supplies cost and all that kind of stuff. And when you actually add up all your supplies, the time it takes, and what you would need to earn to replace your income, you would very quickly realize that it's not really a feasible idea. Selling ready-made items, especially knitting and crochet, is very difficult because it takes so much time. Selling ready-made sewn items, if they're smaller ones, can be easier. Ready-made crochet items or small knitted accessories and things like toys, accessories, that kind of thing, very small items, or items made out of chunky wool, is a little bit more feasible because they're quicker. But if you were selling like shawls and garments and like big lace shawls and sweaters and things, that's very difficult. I do know some people who've done it and are doing it, but I think that's probably mainly people who do it as a hobby and have a lot of time to be able to do it and knit more than they can give away or wear themselves. So they sell it to try and just fund their craft, probably, because it is difficult. I've also seen a lot of women who want to be stay-at-home parents or who have young children and have given up their jobs, trying to turn this into a job. The problem you have to think about is working with young children is very difficult. I didn't do this till my kids were at primary school. I think my youngest daughter was like halfway through primary school at the time. So yeah, for about 20 years I've been doing it. So she would have been probably like 6, 7. And I've seen this knitting designs especially complaining on knitting forums that they struggling to find time to do work because they have young children. And I'm like, well, if you were doing any kind of other job, you wouldn't probably do that around your children. If you go out to work, to a place of work, your children would be looked after by somebody else, either a family member, nursery, school, whatever. Just because you work from home, whether you're self-employed or employed by somebody else and you work from home, you can't expect to fit work around your children, especially when they're very young. Yes, you might be able to get a bit of work done when they're having a nap and that kind of thing, and you might be able to occasionally put them in front of the telly to do some work, but you can't, that's not reliable times. Your child may suddenly stop having a nap and then you lose that hour a day that you were working. So I think if you want to do this with very young children, you have to think very carefully about when you can work. You may find that you're working very late evenings after your children have gone to bed, which that can suit some people, and some people might be happy with that trade-off. I wouldn't have been able to do that because when my kids were little and they went to bed, I was exhausted. And I used to put my kids to bed at 7. I was very strict about a 7 o'clock bedtime till they were quite old, like end of primary school, I think. And because I was exhausted and I was in bed by 9 and I wanted a couple of hours of peace and quiet without them before I went to bed, and I would be in bed by 9 because I was just exhausted and in too much pain. The other thing you need to think about is, can you actually earn enough money to replace your income? Do you need the income you're earning now, and can you replace it? And you have to be realistic and do a bit of market research. How saturated is the market you're moving into? What will people actually pay for things? If you're thinking, well, I can make crocheted soft toys in chunky chenille yarn, for example, so I've heard that's stuff that people make and sell a lot. Can you make it to a professional standard? Can you get paid what you need to pay for it to cover your time and expenses, or will it barely cover your expenses? You need to research the market and research the going rate for your product. What are other products similar to what you're making, whether it's a digital product or an actual product? What are they going for? What will customers pay? Because there's one thing about working out the time that you spend making it, the cost of your products, your profit margin, how much you need to earn to cover all your expenses and that kind of thing. But you may come up with a number that people just won't pay. So you may think, well, I should charge £20 for a PDF knitting pattern because of the amount of time I put into it. Well, I'm sorry, but people are unlikely to pay £20 for a standard PDF knitting pattern, even if it's very detailed and has tutorials and loads of extras. And it's like a mini book. I don't think anyone would pay £20 for that, because you can get magazines with loads of patterns in them, or with several patterns in them for less than that. You can buy books for less than £20. So why would people buy a single pattern for that amount of money? I sell my PDF patterns and printed patterns when I do shows for £5. When I started out, I was selling them for £3.50 because that was the going rate at the time. I would say now here in the UK, going rate is probably £5 to £6. I do charge the same for all my patterns. Some of them are very simple and I could probably charge less. Some of them are more complex and I should probably charge more. But I have decided to just charge a set price for all of them, especially for when I do shows, because I don't want to have to worry about what each pattern costs. My husband helps me out. I have loads of patterns. He doesn't know one pattern from the other, really. So having all my patterns just be £5 is easier. So I made a decision a long time ago that my patterns would all be the same. I do have some older patterns on Ravelry and possibly also on PayHip, most likely on Ravelry, that are a bit cheaper, like £4.50 maybe, because they're older patterns and I haven't put the price up yet because I've not gotten around to it. Or they're an old format or style and I don't feel like I can justify putting the price up unless I reformat, is that the right word? Or update the pattern to make it suit my current style better, and I haven't had time to do that. But all my new patterns are £5. I might want to charge £10 for them, but people aren't going to pay that most of the time, I don't think. If you want to sell finished items, where are you going to sell it? Online? What's the right marketplace for selling it online? Used to be that you could sell stuff like that on Etsy. Etsy used to have quite strict rules in place, so stuff had to be handmade by you or partly by you, I think. And now I get the impression that you can just sell any old cheap tat on Etsy, that you can basically use it as almost like a drop shipping thing, that you order cheap stuff from China and just list it on the Etsy shop and sell it. I haven't sold anything on Etsy for years, and I wouldn't go back to selling on Etsy now because I hear so much negative stuff about it. I know people are still successful selling on Etsy, but when I decided to come off Etsy and onto my own website, I haven't gone back on Etsy. I did lose some business that way, especially American customers who didn't necessarily move over to my website with me. But I gained British customers because at the time Etsy was very much an American thing. And it wasn't as popular with British customers. If you're going to sell your finished items in person, are you going to sell at craft fairs? Are there craft fairs that you can get to where those items will sell? A lot of local craft fairs here are people just selling fairly cheap stuff, and there are a couple of more upmarket craft fairs, but they are like once or twice a year maybe, and they're more difficult to get into, more expensive to get into because the standard is much higher and people are charging a lot more. Obviously it depends on where you live. If I lived in London or some more expensive parts of this country, Cornwall is quite expensive. The part of Cornwall I live in is not. And so you need to look at where your local area is. What's the market where you live locally if you want to sell it locally? Are there local gift shops that you can get into? And like some shops will like hire out a shelf or something and you could sell stuff there. So you need to look into what the opportunities are for you locally. Selling digital goods, patterns, online courses, that kind of thing, you need to research where you're going to sell them. The number one place still, I think, for knitting and crochet patterns is Ravelry. It does have a few problems, but I still sell more patterns through Ravelry than anywhere else, but there are other options. If you want to teach workshops, where can you do that? Are there places near you where you can teach workshops, like yarn shops or festivals and that kind of thing? Can you organize your own workshops? Are there enough people where you live or where you can organize workshops that do your craft? How will people find you? Social media is very crowded, especially in certain fields. It's very difficult to get found on social media now unless you pay to advertise, which I must admit I don't. I used to pay for Ravelry adverts, but I struggled with getting the format of the image right, and I just gave up. And trying to get the slots, they would go for sale and they'd be gone within seconds. So I just gave up, and I haven't advertised on Ravelry for years. Social media is very saturated. Which social media you're going to use? You've got to be consistent. It's very difficult now to build a following. It's probably easier if you are more willing to do videos and do TikTok and that kind of thing. I've never really gotten into TikTok. I occasionally post a TikTok video and then I run. I don't really engage on there or watch anything there because I struggle with the whole TikTok concept. I enjoy YouTube. I'm not as good on Instagram and Twitter and Blue Sky and all those things as I used to be. Obviously, Blue Sky is a bit newer, but similar to Twitter, really. I feel like I've lost my mojo a bit with those kind of platforms, and I don't do as much. I'm not as good at engaging there as I was. Just because the algorithm means that so few people even see my posts, I do it half time, it feels like, what's the point? Which I know sounds very negative, but that's how a lot of business owners feel at the moment. You also got to think about the business admin. If you're going to run a business, if you're going to sell stuff, it is a business, even if you feel like it's a hobby. You have to, if you sell stuff for money, there is a certain amount of business admin that goes with that. These things vary from country to country. Some countries you may have to register as business. In the UK, you can earn a certain amount. I think maybe like if you earn like £1,000 or less per year, you don't have to submit tax return, but I'm not 100% sure. Most people in this country, if you work for somebody else, you would be on a PAYE system where you pay as you earn. So you pay tax as you earn. Your employer is responsible for deducting your tax, and you don't have to submit an annual tax return. If you're self-employed, then you have to submit an annual tax return. And I don't know how that works if you're self-employed and you work for somebody else. I don't know how that works because I've only been self-employed when I've been self-employed, and I haven't worked for somebody else at the same time. But you also have to think about, especially in Europe, VAT registration. VAT is value added tax, and it gets added to products at various points in the production cycle. In the UK, the VAT threshold is very high. I can't remember how high it is, but last time I looked, it was like 85,000 something pounds. You had to, your annual turnover before you had to register for VAT. I'm nowhere near that, so I've never had to worry about VAT. I've seen some indie dyes over the years who've reached that limit and then registered VAT, but because they then had to add the VAT to their prices or take a 20% pay cut, because I think VAT is 20%. I remember one indie dye registered for VAT, and she said next year, I sold less than I did last year, and I made a lot less money because I've had to pay this VAT, and I think that has to be done quarterly. I haven't looked into it too much because I just know I'm way below the threshold, so I'm going to think about it. But that is something you may need to think about, because a lot of European countries have lower VAT thresholds than the UK, much, much lower. There's also VAT rules on digital products in Europe. You've got to think about taxes. You need an accountant. Can you do your own accounts? In the UK, I believe if you're a limited company, you have to pay an accountant. If you're a sole trader, you can do your own taxes. I do my own because mine are fairly simple. Some people choose to pay an accountant just for one job less to do. I do my own because accountants are expensive. And mine are fairly easy to do. Online subscriptions, website fees, domain name fees that have to be renewed, any special software you need. Most of these things now are subscriptions. You have to pay every single month. I pay for some things that I use every single month, like for my website, my newsletter, my online course platform that I use. I pay for like a website that I use to add subtitles to my online course videos, and I don't use that every month, and I'm wondering whether I ought to cancel that. Did I say my newsletter subscription? Pay for that platform, website, PayPal fees, loads of stuff that you need to pay for. You also need to look into what regulations there are for your products. So I've stopped selling to the EU and Northern Ireland because they have separate, quite strict rules now. I haven't really looked into them because when this all came out end of last year, I was just so overwhelmed by it. I just put a note on my website. I can't work out on my website how I can block certain countries, but I just put a note on my website saying, sorry, I'm not selling to the EU or Northern Ireland, because it's just too difficult. Northern Ireland, even though it's part of the UK, comes under EU rules because of having an open border with Ireland. So there's complications caused by Brexit. I don't know how this would have been affected if Britain was still part of the EU. I don't know, but there are rules. I follow a few creators who have set up systems so they can comply with these rules, and it just seems like a ton of work. I do not have the energy or the capacity to tackle at the moment. And my sales to the EU and Northern Ireland were so few anyway that it wouldn't lose me a lot of business, to be quite honest. So I'm not bothered about losing those sales. It's just too complicated to try and comply with it for me. And you have to look at this because these regulations are becoming more and more. And I also feel like as small businesses, we're expected to comply with all this. But I'm also thinking, do all these big businesses comply with all these rules? Or do they get away with it because they're so big? I don't know. Before I came up to film this, I was scrolling through, I think it was Threads, and I saw this post of somebody who had decided to start selling quilt kits. So she designed, I guess, a quilt and bought the fabric and made up quilt kits and not sold any. And was feeling a bit demoralized. And she basically said, turning your hobby into a job is the quickest way of taking the joy out of it. And there is something in that. Depending on how you deal with stress, what else you have on your plate, how much money you're making, it can be the quickest way of taking your joy out of your hobby. And if your hobby is important to you and it's important for you to keep it as your hobby, then think long and hard over whether you want to turn it into a job or not, because it will change the way you think about it. Like, I have deadlines. I have magazine deadlines. I have one later this week. I don't particularly want to block a shawl today, which I have to do, and then tomorrow I have to finish writing the pattern. Is that necessarily what I want to do this week? No, not necessarily, but I have a deadline, so I have to do it. I had a deadline recently where I had to knit a garment, and I designed it. I think it looks great. I think the yarn was the right choice for the garment, but I did not enjoy knitting with it. And it took me longer than I thought it would. And while I was knitting it, I was thinking, why did I suggest doing this? But I have a deadline, so I had to finish it. It had to be done on time, even though I'd rather be working on something else. And sometimes we go through phases like that. I have a lot of personal stuff on at the moment. It's mainly with my parents in Norway and their health issues and things like that. And I'm having to make frequent trips to Norway. I've been to Norway 4 times this year, and we're only at the end of July. And I'm going twice more, hopefully. I booked one. I've booked October. We're going at Christmas as well, but hopefully that will be it, unless there are any emergencies. But because I am my parents' main carer, even though I live in a different country, and that is a huge responsibility. And I spend a lot of time worrying about them and thinking about them when I'm not there and feeling guilty for not being there. And that takes up a lot of time and effort as well. And we've had a lot of I don't want to say problems, but a lot of things going on with my in-laws in the last few years. My mother-in-law passed away last year. My father-in-law is nearly 89 and very capable, but he needs more help than he used to, which my husband mainly does, but obviously it still affects me. And it is difficult, and fitting in the amount of work I used to do on top of all that, something's got to give. So I am rethinking a little bit of how much work I'm doing and when I'm doing it at the moment. So even though you might think if I work for myself, if I'm self-employed, I might be able to fit my job in, or earning some extra money in, around my personal responsibilities. And yes, you might, but it's still a job. You still got to do it. You still have to find time to do it. And that's not always that easy either. So just because you might think it will make you more flexible, that's not always a good thing, because you still got to do the work somehow. You might decide, well, I can work during term time and not work in the school holidays. Yeah, great. But people are still going to email you with pattern questions in the school holidays if you design knitting patterns, for example, things like that. Also, if you are, I guess, especially in the States, where I get the impression that a lot of people, or I know that a lot of people get health insurance as part of their job, are there perks and advantages coming with your job that you would lose if you didn't do that job and you were self-employed? I've known American knitwear designers over the years who have not given up their day job to do it as a full-time job or even as a part-time self-employed job. They've not given up their day job because of the health insurance issue. Because if they gave it up, they would have to pay for health insurance, and that's obviously quite expensive. That's not an issue in the UK because we get free healthcare. It's probably not an issue in most European countries, I don't think. I know some countries have like a hybrid model where you have health insurance and public health service, but it's a lot cheaper. There may be other benefits that you get from your job that you can't replace if you were self-employed, and that's important to think about as well. Will you enjoy working at home, being on your own all day? Now my husband works from home as well, so it's the two of us here. It's different, but I didn't mind working on my own. I quite like my own company, so that was fine. You do have to make an effort to get out occasionally and speak to other people, but some people would hate it, being on their own all day. Can you earn more money if you stayed in your regular job and just kept your hobby as a hobby? I remember years ago when I first lived here, I worked as a riding instructor, a horse riding instructor. And at the time, I don't think I believed that would become my full-time job for life because it doesn't pay very much money. But it was something I did while I was young and single and enjoyed it. And I left that job when Simon and I got married because it didn't pay very much money. But there was a local lady who, I think she was the head teacher of a local primary school or deputy head teacher. And the husband also had a quite good job. I don't know what he did, but he had a very good job. So combined, they earned quite good income. And I used to teach one of her children. Her children, they lived in the village where I was living, and her children used to come for riding lessons. She had her own horse and was a very keen horse rider. And I think she bought her kids ponies eventually, but they used to come for riding lessons, and I taught one of them. And I remember her saying to me that when she was a teenager, she wanted to become a riding instructor, but her parents persuaded her to go to university and get an education and get a well-paying job, because they said if you want to ride, you will be able to ride more if you get a good job and you can afford to buy a horse than if you work as a riding instructor. Because riding instructors on the whole don't earn very much, and you don't get to spend that much time riding. And she said, I think I made the right decision going for a teaching job and then earning enough money to be able to afford to buy a horse. Then I can ride whenever I want to. There's some sense in that. So this is the second time I've turned my hobby into a job. Last time I did it for a couple of years. It was meant to be like a sort of gap year type situation. I met my husband through that job, so I don't regret doing that. I came to live here. I loved it. It was fun. But I don't know if I would have enjoyed doing that job full time for the rest of my life. This job came about because of health reasons and the fact that I couldn't go to work in my old job. And this fitted in with my circumstances at the time, and it still does. And while I can still get enough work to justify calling it a job, I will keep doing it because I really enjoy it. So let me know in the comments, have you thought about turning your hobby into a job? Have you done it? Has it been successful? Have you regretted it? Have you changed your mind? What would you say to somebody who asked you for advice about this? If somebody say to you, oh, you can sell that, or you ought to sell that, or what's your response? But let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.